Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. On behalf of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in New York, I want to welcome all of you to this seminar. Since all of you are here, and I know there's a World Cup game going on, so it seems you like Taiwan better than the World Cup. I want to welcome all of you to this seminar, and I also want to thank FPRI for co-hosting this important event. This year marks two important historic milestones. United States celebrates 250-year anniversary, and Taiwan, we are actually celebrate 30th anniversary of our first presidential election. So there's no doubt Taiwan is an important partner of the United States, and we share the same values such as democracy, freedom, rules of law, etc. In addition, after passing the Taiwan Relation Act in 1979, actually Taiwan and the U.S. relationship have thrived. Let me give you an example. In 1979, Taiwan was actually United States' number 8 trading partner. And the bilateral trading forum at that time was $9.1 billion. And if you look at today, Taiwan is number 4 trading partner of the United States after Mexico, Canada, and China. And the total trade volume in total has reached $285 billion. So you can tell there's a big increase in terms of the trade volume. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't think I want to speak alone, make a long speech because they are going to speak more. So I just want to once again thank you very much for being here, and please continue to enjoy. Thank you.
Next, please join me in welcoming Mr. Stein, President of Foreign Policy and Research Institute, for his opening remarks.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to be as brief as possible because I want to turn it over to the panelists as well. I just want to thank TECO for hosting us again for such a lovely event. It's really a testament to the cooperation between institutions and how we are working together at FPRI to think about the future of U.S. foreign policy and then the future of allied foreign policy. A little bit about FPRI. We are actually a 71-year-old think tank. We're based in Philadelphia. And what we tend to look at, or what we are looking at, is the future of U.S. foreign policy. Looking at the future of alliances, and then how the U.S. and how the world is going to be shaped in the next 25 years to come. And I think there's nothing, I think that is more sort of at the centerpiece of this as the U.S. position in Asia and where this place is going. And so with that, perhaps I'll turn it back over to the moderator here so that we can get on with the event and less opening remarks from people like me so that we can hear from our panelists. With that, I want to thank you everybody for hosting us and thank you for coming.
Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ms. Goto for moderating. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think you all need their introduction. But, I'm Shihoko Goto, the Vice President of Programs at FPRI, and again, I just want to thank the Ambassador and everyone at TECO for allowing us to use this wonderful space to have an important discussion about the future of U.S.-Taiwan relations. And this audience really needs no reminding that Taiwan sits at one of the most consequential intersections in the world today. The fault lines of great power competition, the competition to dominate advanced technology, the competition to reassess the international order, all converge in Taiwan. And these pressures also come at a time when the trajectory of US foreign policy towards the Indo-Pacific remains in flux. And as a result, Taiwan's leadership is navigating considerable security, economic, and political uncertainties that are all bearing down on Taipei simultaneously. One key challenge for that, for Taiwan, is something that all US allies have been grappling with across the Indo-Pacific, is that long-standing assumptions about the United States as a security partner and a champion of a rules-based order have been tested. Another source of concern for Taiwan is that pressure from China has been relentless and intensifying. It's not just military provocations, but economic coercion, disinformation campaigns, green zone provocations, to name but a few. So we'll spend the next hour addressing not just the challenges, but also the opportunities to enhance Taiwan's defense posture, as well as its economic resilience and political stability in a highly contested environment in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. And I'm really happy to be joined by some of the leading US experts on Taiwan and its strategic interests. So let me begin from my left. We have Chris Estep, who is a fellow of FPRI and also a former senior advisor to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Affairs. Next to him is Rupert Hammond-Chambers, president of the U.S. Taiwan Business Council. And then finally, we have Vincent Wang, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Adelphi University and Senior Fellow at FPRI. So perhaps, Vincent, I can start with you. We've had a whole slew of high-stakes summitteering in recent months where Taiwan was not an active participant in the room, but its strategic interests were deliberated by the leaders in that room. So the most recent, of course, is the summit at Evian over the weekend, where the G7 reaffirmed their commitment against unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force or coercion in the East China Sea, the South China Sea, or in the Taiwan Strait. There's been strong rhetorical support for Taiwan, but at the same time, we're also seeing other challenges, other meetings that have put Taiwan into the limelight, not least the Trump-Xi summit meeting, as well as the Xi-Putin meeting, and then the Xi-Kim Jong-un meeting, and the list goes on. So can you start, perhaps, by giving us the lay of the land and how Taiwan is assessing the geopolitical landscape and the domestic debate within Taiwan to secure its strategic interests?
Thank you. I think for an actor like Taiwan, even though diplomatically not represented, but often discussed in a summit, as you mentioned, for the last 40 years, Taiwan has been able to ride on the so-called right side of the history, so to speak. In the 1970s and the 80s, Taiwan was sort of an inspiring example of the little tigers. So how a poor developing country can take advantage of export-led global economy and become wealthy and more open. And in the 1980s and the 90s, Taiwan was part of the so-called third wave democracy. So as a scholar, I often find that Taiwan to be a very good case study. Sort of, I'm also an optimist, so I always find Taiwan to be a very good case study. But I think that ironically, in the second decade of the 21st century, Taiwan actually find its geopolitical environment very deteriorating. Deteriorating not because of Taiwan's own doing, but because of some of the factors you had already mentioned. Namely that one important pillar for Taiwan's security and confidence in the past was the U.S. support. But the U.S., I think that if you, I've actually seen some polls after the Xi-Trump summit, that the confidence in the United States among Taiwan population has actually dropped 10 percentage points. So around 44% of Taiwanese citizens being polled now say that it's very likely or more or less likely that the U.S. would intervene if there should be a contingency. This is a decline of 10% right after the Trump visit. So, of course, opinion polls are ephemeral, but I think that at any time a 10% drop is still very notable. So that's one thing I want to mention, that Taiwan feels insecure. And the insecurity, I don't know if Trump, of course, Taiwan is not alone because many allies and adversaries alike feel that Trump being very transactional and being very unpredictable. But I think Taiwan actually has additional concerns because its concern is actually, I would call it existential, namely that it faces China's not only increasing military buildup, but also the normalization of its military presence around Taiwan. And it's not just military assets like airplanes, fighter planes or vessels and so on, but also China is engaged in gray zone tactics, for which right now there are no very strong pushback. In fact, I wrote elsewhere that I think that the gray zone tactic would really put the Taiwan Relations Act Section 2 to test, namely, for example, they engage in cyber attack, disinformation campaign, they're cutting undersea cables, and also they are taking advantage of the open nature of Taiwanese society to sow doubts that the United States is not a reliable partner, or at least not as reliable as before. So this sort of U.S. skepticism, theory of U.S. skepticism. And they also try to foster a fatalism, namely Taiwan has no other choice but to come to negotiation table under Beijing's terms. So that's one thing that Taiwan is assessing. And the other, of course, Taiwan is not standing still. I would point out, and maybe there are a lot of people in this audience who will know this better than I do, is that Taiwan is responding with what I will call a whole of society response. For example, that there are more training and there are also more preparation in order to, one of the key words in Taiwan these days is actually called resilience. So how a democratic open society can be resilient in the face of this sort of unrelenting challenge from the PRC. Taiwan military has also quietly but assuredly moved away from large platforms, those are status symbols, and toward asymmetric capabilities. These are things on mobile, cost-effective, and decentralized defense systems in order to deter or complicate any Chinese amphibious assault or blockade. But that still leaves the question, what do you do with those the gray zone tactics? They are very annoying, but the Chinese are also trying to establish a new reality, sort of the new normal. And I would also argue that Taiwan has taken an economic approach toward security, namely given its predominant position in global semiconductors, especially the high-end. Taiwan hopes that its fate is actually intertwined with the global society. So this notion about the silicon shield, right? So of course, there are a lot of debate about whether there is a shield and whether a lot of investment by TSMC in the United States, even though this could help the United States reshore its semiconductor industry, but if it's too much reshoring, what's left of the TSMC? But I think that, there's recognition that Taiwan is important, but its security environment is actually deteriorating. And that because the U.S. sort of the implicit extended deterrence is not as assured as before. So the Taiwanese society is not standing still. It's doing its best to respond to that, but it's hampered by a domestic structure that is also very challenging. I will call this, Taiwan is facing a national security threat, very acute national security threat, but without a consensus. So this is a doubling challenge. And not only that the ruling party and the opposition party have the usual partisan points to score. So the most recent arms procurement package is one example. But also I think that even though the DPP and the KMT do not differ very much on domestic policies, but I think they do differ on the issue about how to deal with China. I think that is actually the key fault line, that the KMT believes that it can return to the golden days of the Ma Ying-jeou era, namely simultaneously engage China and the United States. But the DPP does not think it is possible, and it's tried to, it was more successful during the Biden administration to side with the Democratic community, but that democracy does not seem to matter as much to Trump as much. So Taiwan finds itself in a really big quandary.
Yeah, and thank you for giving us a really sweeping overview, ranging from everything from public polling to military capabilities to domestic party politics. So you've given us a lot to grapple with here, but let me turn now to Chris to focus on some of the security concerns. And so we see U.S. arms sales to Taiwan has been seen as a key measure of U.S. support for Taiwan, and we keep an eye, of course, on the $14 billion arms sale that is being put on hold. But when we look at the other side of the equation, as Vincent said, the PLA's own capabilities continue to surge. And we've seen things like military-civil fusion intensifying as well. Is there a consensus within the United States regarding its commitment, especially on the military front, to Taiwan, and which could reassure the Taiwanese public and shed strategic clarity on U.S. expectations for Taiwan as well?
Well, thanks, Shihoko, and thank you to TECO and FPRI for bringing together this great event. I'm especially excited to be having this conversation with two other esteemed panelists, and of course guided and moderated by Shihoko. As it relates to the security dynamic between the United States and Taiwan in particular, I think it's actually worth taking a step back and examining just all of the ways in which the U.S. toolkit for increasing its security cooperation with Taiwan has grown and expanded and advanced over the past several years. So Shihoko, you obviously mentioned the matter of foreign military sales for years. That has been one metric to measure U.S. support for Taiwan's ability to defend itself. But in recent years, we've seen that toolkit expand to include tools like foreign military financing, presidential drawdown authority for Taiwan, the recent creation of the Taiwan Security Cooperation Initiative, and other measures that give the US government greater authority to partner with Taiwan in a greater range of ways, both on what we would consider to be the more traditional forms of military cooperation, as well as, to Vincent's point, some of the whole of society resilience efforts that we've seen Taipei make such important strides on in recent years. And when I was serving in the Biden administration, we obviously had a front row seat to the creation of those tools by large bipartisan majorities in Congress. I think that's a pretty significant indicator of where support for Taiwan stands in the United States as a political issue. But what we also saw in the Biden-Harris administration was that it's not enough to simply create the toolkit, to create these authorities. We also need members of Congress, strong bipartisan majorities in Congress, to actually resource those authorities with taxpayer dollars. And I think there's a recognition, particularly on Capitol Hill, that while it's sometimes difficult to quantitatively measure return on investment for strengthening deterrence across the strait, Taiwan's own ability to defend itself is nevertheless one of the highest return on investment lines of effort that the United States could support in order to maintain peace and stability across the strait. So again, in recent years, we've seen the expansion of this toolkit. We've seen recently mixed signals, of course, from the current administration and how it intends to make use of that toolkit. But I believe that when you look at Capitol Hill today, there is still a very strong bipartisan expectation that the executive branch should draw upon the fullest toolkit at its disposal. And in the coming years, time will tell to see whether the US government and Washington is willing to actually use the tools that it has at its disposal to strengthen Taiwan's ability to defend itself.
Thank you. So let's turn to economic security and the toolkit that's available on that front. So when it comes to economic relations, Taiwan has a clear bargaining chip, no pun intended, with the United States. But when we look at U.S. trade, in particular tariff policy, Taiwan has signed the agreement on reciprocal trade earlier this year, which needs to be approved by the legislative yuan, as at the same time Washington is grappling domestically about the powers and limits of what it can do with tariffs as a tool for economic negotiation. So, Rupert, you've played a pivotal role in promoting trade between the United States and Taiwan, and most recently you've organized a defense industry delegation. And I would like you to share perhaps some of the concerns that you are hearing, some of the feedback that you are hearing from both Taiwanese investors into the United States and vice versa, and what we are missing as we continue to try to enhance economic ties between the two sides.
Shihoko, well, thank you, and also and Ambassador Lee for including me. And I also want to recognize Ambassador Burghardt here, who is a past and present, hugely important voice in U.S. Taiwan relations. Thank you for including me. If we think about American national interest, let's start there. I was struck by a speech that Vice President Vance made early on when it was February or March in Paris last year. He gave a speech on artificial intelligence and the importance of it as it relates to American national interest moving forward. And while he did not explicitly mention Taiwan, he was absolutely laser focused on ensuring that the United States had an array of economic relationships that ensured that the US was going to be able to not just compete with the Chinese in AI and everything that accrues from that competition, leading that competition, but actually win that competition. Well, if you look at the semiconductor industry, we have this incredibly dynamic supply chain that runs right through Taiwan. When you look at the AI supply chain, it runs right through Taiwan. So Ambassador Lee very sweetly sort of chummed the waters for us a wee bit when he talked about Taiwan's ascendancy as a bilateral trading partner for the United States. Number four. I mean, it's shocking in one sense, and it just really, in that one number, just strikes right at the heart of how important this bilateral economic relationship is right now to the national security interests of both countries, and that relationship is not flattening out, it's deepening. It is continuing to deepen. It's continuing to expand in importance. When we think about what's happening with this supply chain, another little data point, because we love data. If we go back to 2011, 2012, 82% of Taiwan outbound investment from Taiwan systems integrators and supply chain companies flowed into China, 82%. The new data that came out from the DGBAS, which is the Taiwan government's statistics office, it's less than 1%. Less than 1% now for the last 6 months. Well, even though in gross terms, of course, the amount of outbound investment is increased. When we look at it as a percentage of outbound investment, the amount of forward deployed capital has moved dramatically away from China. Taiwan is important because it's a principal supply chain partner for the vast majority of our technology companies if we just stay in the tech running lane, and the importance of this AI infrastructure moment and the potential for that to have longevity. So we look at projected GDP for Taiwan for 2026, it's going to be close to 10%. We're about 9.5% right now. I suspect if things go well, that's going to tick up over 10% for this year. That is absolutely being driven by technology procurement. Just for what it's worth, in that procurement, 25 cents of every dollar goes to TSMC, just to give you some sense of how incredibly important that company is globally, as well as to Taiwan specifically. So the nature of the relationship economically has really never been important, and as has already been mentioned, it gives Taiwan a seat at the table that is both an economic opportunity, but it is also a foreign policy and national security opportunity. It is both a Ministry of Economic Affairs imperative, but for Ambassador Lee and his colleagues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Minister Lin's technology diplomacy approach, it is a hugely important tool now in Taiwan's ability to project its interests and push back on the hegemonic attitude and behavior of the Chinese as it relates to Taiwan's legitimate international space. And I think that's also important to recognize. We are in a very new environment. Just a couple of other quick things. Art implementation. The bilateral agreement is consummated. It has not been passed, of course, by the Li-Fa Yuan. We would have seen that already. But when the US Supreme Court came out and checked Mr. Trump's path in respect to his ability to negotiate bilateral trade agreements, the legal language for the art negotiation has had to be rewritten. So you've got all the art agreements that the US has consummated have to be rewritten. And for those of you who know USTR well, it's actually pretty small. And we get very, very good bang for our buck from our USTR colleagues. They're a terrific organization, but there are not a lot of them. It's not like the Department of Commerce or other organizations which have a lot of people at play. It's going to take a wee while. I would expect the art passage in the autumn or early winter, but before the autumn legislative session ends prior to the Lunar New Year. One other quick thing that's very important for us in the economic relationship, and then I'll pause. The bilateral tax agreement. I know it's the evening, please don't fall asleep if we start talking about tax policy, but for inbound investment and the headwinds created by double taxation for outbound investment, Taiwan into the United States, there's a tremendous amount of capital sitting on the sidelines right now, waiting for a change in the tax regime, and vice versa, US into Taiwan. Perhaps some of you will have seen some of the news of late of businesses like Lam and Applied Materials and AMD. I mean, these are multi-billion dollar investments flowing into Taiwan, but they are restricted by the absence of a modern bilateral tax agreement. And our hope is, we're working on it, our members are working on it, that there will be passage of that prior, again, to the end of this congressional session in January of next year.
Yeah, that's really great news about the double taxation progress, because it has been a sore point for Taiwan for quite a while. I want to go back, though, to this idea of Taiwan as the behemoth when it comes to advanced technology. We can have no conversation about technology as a source of not just growth, but power without talking about Taiwan. at the same time, what I really wanted to highlight today was one of the most remarkable developments at the G7 meeting last weekend from an economic security perspective was about the top AI leaders were actually joining the G7 leaders as almost peers. And the rules of AI governance are rapidly being established, and at the same time there is concern too about the G2, the United States as well as China, really framing and shaping the rules of AI moving forward. So we saw, for instance, Japan and France on the sidelines of the summit, exploring a framework of AI intelligence to reduce excessive reliance on both China as well as the United States. I point this out because I would like to ask all three of you about what this means for Taiwan moving forward, how Taiwan is looking to move forward and play a pivotal role, as it ought to, in defining some of the AI architecture. Maybe I could start with you, Chris, and then we can move down. Yes?
Of course, look, I'll certainly leave it to Rupert and to Vincent to speak to some of the broader international governance issues as it relates to Taiwan's role in shaping sort of the future of how this technology that is going to, in many ways, define the future of geopolitics. But maybe two quick points here. The first is, and you've heard both of my fellow panelists talk about this already, which is that the AI revolution is going to make Taiwan's silicon shield even more consequential and even more important. It's going to, this technology is going to make Taiwan even more inextricably linked to global economic prosperity in ways that I think redound to the advantage of Taiwan, certainly. As it relates to the potential for AI in the defense and security lane, there are also transformative potential applications for this technology in improving Taiwan's ability to defend itself, particularly when it comes to some of these asymmetric capabilities that you've heard folks talking about, not only tonight, but over the past several months and years. I think it's important, though, when thinking about Taiwan's ability to adopt and incorporate new technologies, new innovations across its security portfolio, it just underscores why Washington and Taipei need the kind of flexible and adaptable relationship and toolkit and security arrangements that will allow for Washington to more effectively support Taipei's ability to not only procure the technologies of the future that are going to strengthen deterrence across the strait, but in addition to procuring those technologies, actually knowing how to use them and using them effectively in ways that ultimately strengthen deterrence, strengthen Taiwan's ability to defend itself.
You just go in order? Yeah, great. I would, just a couple of points I'd love to make on this, in no order of priority. I think Taiwan has a challenge. I'd make an observation. TSMC is obviously a top 10 company in the world. It's almost impossible to have a panel like this and not have touch on TSMC. But it's important to understand that the Taiwan government does not control TSMC, right? TSMC is an independent business. Obviously, there is synergy between that. Taiwan is an important investor in TSMC, right? I think 6 or 7% of the company is still owned by the government. But TSMC operates independently. But I do think to fully capitalize from a foreign policy and national security standpoint, if we're talking about a seat at the global table, Taiwan will have to be judicious about where it chooses to focus its investment so that it can fully capitalize politically on that. And let me illustrate what I mean by that. I wouldn't encourage Taiwan, for example, to try and encourage its companies to invest in all of Europe. Right? The French and the Germans are going to continue to have a mercantilist, Sino-centric approach to investment. But the Central European countries, well, they have a more nuanced view, and particularly because they were occupied and controlled by communists, they understand quite clearly what it means to live under communist rule. So pushing investment into Central Europe, the Baltics, I think is a very good idea because the economics make sense and because there's probably more political benefit from that. In the Indo-Pacific, the first island chain, right? I think we're going to see Taiwan talked more about, and I think this is a very healthy development, in the context of the first island chain, not just independently in respect to itself, but in respect to an integrated Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, particularly, narrative that relates to economics and business, but also security, right? When we talk about integrated security, interoperability with us, I think we're going to find that we're talking more about that. So from an economic standpoint, I think that you're going to see more of that discussed.
So just a couple points. My view on the global governance is that the important players in a functional area should be present. So in this regard, to answer your question, Shihoko, that artificial intelligence, Taiwan should have a seat at the table. I think it should begin with the United States making a sort of a more explicit effort to highlight Taiwan's important role and contribution, for example, beginning with the Silica Pax Silica in the State Department. I think this is still a new initiative, and maybe there are some political considerations, but let's be very honest, because we are, I mean, the one reason the United States is trying to have a sort of a non-China consortium of reliable chips provider is precisely this. So why not include Taiwan? So that was one thing I want to make. The other point I want to make is to actually play off a point Rupert made that, is TSMC equal to Taiwan? It is not. And therefore, my point is that yes, TSMC is one of the largest companies in the world in terms of capitalization, but Taiwan's, it's also great that Taiwan now ascends to fourth largest trading partner of the United States. Much of the growth comes from the semiconductors. But Taiwan's economy, in order to have a wholesome society, needs more balanced development. You cannot just have one single industry or a single company. Recently, I made this annual visit to visit my mom in Kaohsiung, and they dug up the roads, and I was curious, why this is not like I-94, which never finished, that. So I later learned they're actually laying the underground power line for a new TSMC plant in Kaohsiung, because, as you know, AI consumes a lot of electricity. So this is actually one challenge for Taiwan. You want to make great strides on AI, but you also need to produce a lot of power. And Taiwan has one of the cheapest power sources in all of Asia. Can you have all of them? I mean, do you want to have a more balanced development? Semiconductors is great, but Taiwan, in order to have a greater prosperity, more equality, you cannot rely on semiconductors alone.
Thank you. I am mindful of the time, and I would like to leave time for questions from the audience. But before I turn, give the microphone to the floor, I'd like to ask about the changing nature of war. And so we have seen continued tensions between Iran and the United States. And defense capabilities are not necessarily just measured in military power, but it really is measured in how choke points are held. I'd like to ask about how Taiwan is and can leverage its assets to be part of an alliance network that could push back against the weaponization of economic advantages by authoritarian or non-like-minded governments. So maybe I start with you, Rupert, first, if you have a comment. And
just so I understand, are we talking about the integration of Taiwan into new supply chains for new platforms and systems? Could you just...
So what we are seeing is that there is an asymmetry between the United States, a clear asymmetry between the United States and Iran when it came to trying to resolve this conflict. But Iran has been able to have this chokehold on energy supply. This is on energy security, and we are tremendously focused on energy security today. But at the same time, there are fragilities in the supply chain in every area. For Taiwan, that is obviously in the semiconductor side. Is there an opportunity, therefore, for Taiwan to anticipate such leveraging of chokeholds over semiconductors and be part of that security alliance and not just about the commercial aspect of chips?
Thank you. I'd make an observation straight out. You don't sail chips off Taiwan Island, you fly them off. So if we're talking about sort of similar optics in respect to the Strait of Hormuz, the Chinese would have to start shooting down commercial airplanes, right? Because I'm not being flippant, I mean, that's to have some sort of similarity to what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz and the attacking tankers. If you fly United or EVA or Starlux or however you get to Taiwan, for those of you who have been there or traveled there, in the belly of your aircraft are semiconductor chips if you're flying Taiwan back to the States, in all likelihood. So that's, you know, when we think about blockades, when we think about disruption, we are talking about a different situation, but the Iranians have demonstrated, I wish we could get Aaron up here, I'm sure he'd have a great deal to say on all of this. The Iranians have demonstrated that you don't need very much to disrupt the flow of trade. And when we consider just how enormous the flow of trade is, not just around the Taiwan Strait, but please bear in mind for organizations like the one I'm privileged to work for, we don't consider a U.S. Taiwan-China conflict as only a Taiwan Strait conflict. In my opinion, it will metastasize into a conflict that covers all of North Asia at a minimum. So we're talking about trade for Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and China at a bare minimum. And that's going to have a catastrophic impact. I don't mean to be overly melodramatic, but it would on the interests of the global economy in ways in which the plight of our brothers and sisters in Ukraine and others, that there are real economic issues, but they're just not as significant. If I may, I'd like to just note something that Mr. Trump said on his way back from his meeting with Mr. Xi, because I don't think it got as much play as it should have in the public domain. Certainly we heard about Taiwan arms sales as a bargaining chip. But Mr. Trump went on to turn the screw on his contention, I think misunderstood perhaps, no for sure, that Taiwan stole the semiconductor industry. Well, that's not really what happened, frankly. But he also went on to say that by the time he steps down in January of 2029, somewhere between 40 and 50% of high-end chip production will have already migrated to the United States. Well, that is absolutely not going to be the case. There is significant investment flowing into Phoenix, of course. There's a lot of capital being applied in Austin, Texas, where Samsung and Apple are. Obviously, Intel and TSMC are in Phoenix, Arizona. But to get to 40 or 50%, we're talking about 10, 15 years out, even if that were possible. But when you look at the Taiwan Ministry of Economic Affairs data, what you see, in fact, is global production rising, US production rising, but US production as a percentage of global production, it remains pretty steady. Taiwan will remain, in all likelihood, over the next decade, somewhere between 65 and 70% of production, with the only real headwinds coming from, as Vincent noted, power, people, energy, power, people, water, and land in Taiwan. That'll be an increasingly significant headwind. But if the president believes that 40 or 50% of high-end chip production will take place by 2029, what impact will that have on him as he thinks about the importance of Taiwan's role in the AI space, right? If he truly believes that that's where the United States will be, it should, but then as a consequence, impact the way in which he thinks about how important Taiwan is. Not in a positive way, I might add. So I want to leave that with you. I'm cognizant of the fact that I can continue to talk, but I want to leave that with you and to think more about what that might potentially mean for US considerations of national interest in coming to Taiwan's defense.
Let me jump in here quickly as well, which is, you asked essentially your question about lessons learned from the U.S. conflict with Iran and the Middle East. I actually think this applies not only to the conflict that we've seen in the last couple of months, but some of the most significant eye-catching conflicts that we've seen around the world over the past couple of years, which is that when we think about the future of warfare, it is increasingly difficult for a country with conventional military advantages to translate those advantages into acceptable political outcomes on the ground. And I think we've obviously seen that is the case in the Middle East. I think we've seen that in Ukraine in the midst of Russia's invasion as well. And for all of our focus tonight on some of the puzzles and the challenges facing decision makers in Taipei and in Washington, that is also a fundamental puzzle that Beijing faces as well. In order to, in thinking about how they might proceed in the next couple of years, Xi and others have a range of operational problems that they have to be able to solve that conventional military advantages alone will not be able to solve for them. And so the task ahead for decision makers in both places, in Washington and in Taipei in the coming years, is to think about how to introduce new puzzle pieces that are harder to fit together, and how to make those existing puzzle pieces different shapes and sizes that, again, make it even harder for Beijing to put together into a satisfactory campaign. No, the chessboard is the chessboard. I know this space is replete with analogies, porcupines and chessboards in multiple dimensions. But I think the borderless puzzle analogy is another way to think about Beijing's strategic calculus.
I largely agree with Chris. I think that in international relations, the strong does not always win. Okay? And in fact, that in the last few years, a lot of players are wondering and watching the sort of the fights between David and Goliath, in Russia versus Ukraine and the United States versus Iran. So I'll just leave with a sort of maybe a question or maybe a fantasy that of course, for example, the drones is one area that the United States and Taiwan are going to cooperate and to scale up. But if one day Taiwan Strait, which everybody knows is a crucial waterway, not only to China, but also to Japan and so on, if Taiwan Strait can be turned into the equivalent of Strait of Hormuz. So I think I'll just leave it there.
All right, so you've all been very patient. I believe there are microphones. I'd like to take two at a time, if I may. The gentleman there, and then the next person in the white coat as well. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. My name is David Modiano. Ambassador, thank you for the invitation. We met at the Alexander Hamilton Society event. Thank you for the talk. One comment or question. I've heard that it looks like the support from the United States to Taiwan is from the outside diminishing, or the perception of it is diminishing, which I would slightly, kind of think differently. But the point is that I think we've experienced with Trump in the last, 2 years or 1.5 years of his second term, that he actually expects other partners, allies, and we won't talk about the adversaries, but that they participate in the efforts that the United States have been making over the years and will make going forward. And so I think we see that with Europe, we see that with the Middle East, and really what I think is expected from Taiwan is that it also invests in itself and invests in its defense and truly participate in the potential defense of a Chinese invasion if it ever happens, which I think is less likely for various reasons, but we can argue about that. That's a big debate. But also what I know is that the budget on defense has increased from maybe 1% to 2% to 2% to 3%, like de minimis compared to what it, if you look at Russia, which is like 12% of GDP, even if it's a very tough economy, or you look at Israel, you look at Singapore. So what do you say about kind of Taiwan's role in its own defense?
Okay. So why don't we take one more question?
Hi, my name is Yushen, and thanks, Shihoko, for mentioning energy security, because I do research on energy security with a focus on Taiwan and China. So I'm actually wondering, so the recent statistic has shown that after the war of Iran, actually Taiwan has deepened the reliance on U.S. energy export. So nowadays, as far as until April this year, actually Taiwan has imported more than 50% of its crude oil from the US and more than 40% of its gas from the US. So of course, like Trump administration have this energy dominance agenda, so kind of fit into that, but also a lot of Asian countries are also shifting their supply of energy from other countries to the US. So my question is to Rupert, from your perspective, how can we strengthen this cooperation between the US and Taiwan energy trade? And also going forward, how do you see that develop? Do you see that's more integrated into the supply chain, or more like co-investment, or how do you see that? Thank you.
You don't have to answer both. You can answer whatever you don't have to answer. But who would like to go first? Rupert?
Okay, so in the interest of time, let's start with the energy quickly. So there's a lot of opportunity in U.S.-Taiwan relations in respect to energy. Taiwan has a political problem because the trade imbalance between Taiwan and the United States continues to expand. I do not believe that trade imbalances are necessarily a particularly accurate way of determining so-called fairness in trade relationships. It doesn't matter what I believe. Mr. Vincent and the President and others do believe that. And Taiwan's trade imbalance is going to continue to expand. Energy procurement is a way, particularly given the importance that Mr. Trump and his colleagues, his administration, place on American energy independence and the importance of the United States in respect to providing particularly oil and gas, but also technologies to the partners and allies. And I think Taiwan will continue to see that as a political opportunity and an economic opportunity. I would watch what Senators Sullivan and Murkowski are doing with the state of Alaska, and the prospect that we're going to see significant announcements in the autumn this year over new developments in Alaska for the production and distribution of LNG into the Indo-Pacific area. I think that's an important point. In Taiwan, we've seen the DPP move a wee bit under Wei-cheng since Tsai Ing-wen's administration on nuclear. I mean, it's a soap opera, isn't it? Since closing down the second and third power plants and then literally within months deciding to reopen them. And of course, Longmen, the number 4 plant, never actually got opened. SMRs are attractive, but they are a decade away at least, and Taiwan's not going to be the first to embrace those, not for a moment. But it's an attractive technology, but nothing that we're going to see in any time soon. There is a huge problem, though, around energy in Taiwan, and that's government subsidy of energy production for individuals and for corporations, because it promotes misuse, right? And countries, again, it's just my argument, but countries shouldn't subsidize utilities because it promotes the misallocation of resources and waste. And in this instance, also, we have the added liability of Thai Power, the government-owned and run state-owned enterprise. The amount of they're putting the debt on Thai Power's books, and that negatively impacts resilience that has already been impacted because the government is not investing. It's basically doing year-on-year pay-as-you-go, as opposed to investing in a robust network and infrastructure to power the homes of individuals and the businesses. So much more to say. I'd love to answer your question, but it would be unfair. Go ahead.
Let me take a quick swing at it, if that's all right. Look, and this is your question as it relates to Taiwan's military spending and the role of Taiwan's military spending in strengthening deterrence. Look, I think it's important that policymakers in the United States applaud some of the recent moves to increase Taiwan's military spending. I think we've seen a couple of missed opportunities, frankly, by senior officials in Washington to do just that. They, in recent weeks and months, seem to have a hard time saying the word Taiwan when it matters most. But what I would also say, though, is that, you know, even if Taiwan were to spend 50% of its GDP on defense, when you look at the security situation across the strait, when you look at the conventional military advantages and spending that Beijing can bring to bear, it is just apparent and obvious that closer partnership with the United States, closer cooperation with the United States is still a very important part of the equation. And so when you think about U.S. support, popular U.S. support for Taiwan, I think when you present the argument in that form to the median American voter, I think there is an instinctive understanding that the United States still has a very important role to play in strengthening the defensive capabilities of an important partner.
Well, let's just deal with the number, right. But it's not 1%. Taiwan's 2.6,
Yeah.
right? It's 3.5 if the special if Mr. Trump takes yes for an answer, right? And it'll be 5 by 2030. There's all the data. If you look at hard procurement as a reflection of Taiwan intent, you're not just talking about special budgets and supplemental budgets. We don't hear more about those, but I think you might this autumn. But you're also talking about procurement through the regular defense budget, which is up to 20 now and will continue to grow, linked to overall GDP growth. You're talking, even if we just have decent growth up to 2030, you're talking about procurement in the just procurement, not training and other things, just procurement, 70 to 75 billion US in the next 4 years, the bulk of which will come to the United States through FMS. So the numbers are very significant. Can Mr. Trump and his colleagues take yes for an answer? I think that's the question we're sitting and waiting for right now.
And that's exactly the point that I was essentially trying to make, that by throwing out 50% of GDP as a hypothetical example, again, certainly not a realistic expectation. And so to your point, Rupert, it's a matter of what can Washington accept as a meaningful increase in spending.
All right, so I know we've gone past our time, but if I may, Ambassador, take 2 more questions. The gentleman in the glasses and the gentleman in the green shirt. And then we can continue the conversation.
Anders Kaur, Journal of Political Risk. What are the chances and how much support is there in Taiwan for obtaining a nuclear deterrent, an independent nuclear deterrent?
Hi, Philip Ellison. You know, we're talking about how over the last several years, really, even going back to the previous administration, I think there were at least four occasions when the president had his pronouncements about Taiwan kind of taken back by staff. And now, of course, you've got the current president who he likes to rattle cages. And so my question really is, with all of the disruption of some basic assumptions about our alliances, how has it been, or how was it received in Taiwan, the recent change in the Japanese constitution having to do with its defense? And I guess the concept would be, from the allies that the U.S. seems to be walking away from to some degree, there might actually be some strength that could be drawn upon by regional players such as Taiwan.
I'd like to take on sort of this nuclear issue. I think the real question is the credibility of the U.S. security commitment. If Taiwan feels secure enough, it does not need to acquire an independent nuclear capability. The same thing can be said about, and this is why what the U.S. does regarding Taiwan is so important to other allies and friends in the Indo-Pacific, such as Japan and South Korea, because if all these three entities, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, can develop a nuclear weapons program if they want to, but under what conditions? Will the costs actually outweigh the benefits? So I think that as long as Taiwan feels secure enough, implicitly or explicitly, about U.S. security, it is better not to pursue the nuclear path as it had done in the past. I mean, just look at Iran. Iran. There's a fundamental difference between Iran and North Korea. So I think that, I think that the real question is the U.S. security commitment.
So on your question, I think the way I'd like to approach this is a discussion over an issue that's deeply embedded in U.S. Taiwan relations, and that's the tension between strategic clarity and strategic ambiguity. Mr. Biden, bless him, on 4 separate occasions, as you astutely note, injected strategic clarity into American policy. I loved him for it. I'm a strategic clarity guy. More clarity about American intent and American national interest. But in fairness to Mr. Trump, he returned us to legacy US policy, which is strategic ambiguity, where we are ambiguous about American national intent and would treat any scenario based on what transpired. And he brought us to that. I would make an observation about clarity and ambiguity. It is not a light switch that we turn on and off. It is not this extreme and this extreme. Clarity and ambiguity can come in different ways along a pivot like this. You can get a little bit more clarity or a little bit more ambiguity, and we can see it through different aspects of the bilateral relationship. Let me illustrate it quickly for you. If you think about it from a security relationship standpoint and the division of responsibility, to that gentleman's very good question about resource allocation, Taiwan can't reasonably afford everything that they should buy in defense. But if we had more clarity about the division of responsibility between Japan, the United States, and Taiwan, we could have more clarity about the division of resources. So we could say, okay, Japan, you're going to take care of this. Taiwan, you're going to do littoral, you're going to build ships that are going to be able to handle 12 miles out, 50 miles out, right? We're going to take care of that. We'll take care of hunting submarines in your territorial waters, where you can have a division of, so it's more clarity, but it's not full clarity. It's not a blank check. Yes, Taiwan, whatever happens, we'll be there for you. Thank you for the question. I think this is such an important area to focus on.
And I think the through line in both of the last 2 questions is just the importance of official rhetoric, right? US words matter. They send a signal in Taipei, they send a signal to allies and partners across the region. And so particularly in official pronouncements, getting the words right is incredibly important. I think as it relates to the strategic ambiguity versus strategic clarity debate, obviously a very live debate in the policy community. But I think it's also important to remember that it's not just about what the United States says as a matter of stated policy, but also what other regional players perceive. And I think there it is abundantly clear that regardless of US stated policy on that particular issue, we see enormous anxiety in Beijing in particular about the role that the United States may be willing to play in the event of conflict across the Taiwan Strait, should that ever occur. And so I think for those reasons, there are a number of steps that the United States can still take to strengthen deterrence across the Strait that fall short of a change in stated policy.
Yeah. And certainly, I mean, words really matter. And there's great anxiety amongst America's staunchest allies and partners, including Taiwan. But what we do know is that the United States is an indispensable glue in ensuring that there is a united front to meet shared challenges and shared interests. I know that we can continue this conversation for a very long time, but I'm also very aware that there is a lovely Taiwanese buffet set up for us. So again, thank you all so much for joining us today despite the weather, and my deepest gratitude to Ambassador Lee, to everyone at TECO for allowing us to be here today. And if you could join me in thanking our speakers, Chris, Rupert, and Vincent. Thank you all.